I am Brad Keelor. He is Dustin Taylor. Next on Director's Cut, find out why he stayed awake for over 48 hours out in the field. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Director's Cut. My name is Brad Keelor. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and that is why we call this show Director's Cut. Every single week, I sit down with a different GI member, and see me ascending here already, a different GI member who has stories to tell. Sometimes they're personal, sometimes they're professional. They're always fun. If you don't know anything about the Geo-Institute, this is as good a time as any for you to find out some information. We are a technical society with about 12,000 members, most of whom are geotechnical engineers and or geologists. We are housed within the American Society of Civil Engineers, and you can find out more at geoinstitute.org. If you like what you see today, and I think you will, you should click subscribe. You should click get notifications. If you do those two things in that order, we will let you know every single time we post something new to our YouTube channel. With all that out of the way, now we get to the fun part. Dustin Taylor from Seattle, Washington, engineering business manager at TenCate. I didn't even give a Seattle nickname. I was thinking about this earlier today. I was going to be like, from the Emerald City. So I'll just say it now. From the Emerald City, Dustin, how are you today?
I'm doing really good. Sunny, beautiful here. A little cold, but beautiful.
As it is here, spring is coming. I'm back in the sunroom for all our regular viewers. So we have 10 killer questions today. 2 are the same that we ask everybody else, and we start with one of those. Describe your job in 45 seconds.
Okay, well, I'm an engineering business manager for TenCate Geosynthetics Americas, Solmax, and I cover Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Utah. I work with entities, public and private, DOTs, engineers, to come up with the best specifications to improve subgrade conditions for projects, for working platforms, roadways, civil infrastructure.
That was quick.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you a bonus question already. Since you've been there, what is the craziest use of one of TenCate's products that you've seen? Something just unexpected.
Yeah, so we have a product like our Cadillac product. It's called H2RI. It's a moisture management product, and it's there to help reduce capillary pressure, to help move water out of the subgrade, to keep the longevity of civil infrastructure products. But the most crazy use of it was at the bottom of an excavation for an Amazon building, and there's a lake that was draining. You know, they had the dewatering systems, but one of the pumps had gone out, so they used the H2RI in the bottom of the excavation to keep it dry so that they could get the slab down.
Very cool.
Yeah, very innovative. It was fun.
It's good, and a good little commercial there for your employer.
Yeah, and I got to go down in the hole. I got to see. Yeah, it was a full project. Got to get on the site finally, and it was kind of like going back to my old roots of getting down in the excavations.
That's great, and we'll hear a little bit more about that later, I think, and some of your field experiences. We have to get to a fun question first, though, as Director's Cut is loaded with these every week. What is the craziest thing that's ever happened to you on public transportation? Do you have any good stories?
Yeah, well, I live in Seattle, so I've seen a lot of very interesting characters on public transportation. I use public transportation to get to work and to school when I was in school. And I've seen a lot of that, but I'm going to go a little more fun one. When I was in Paris, I was going out to Versailles and ended up getting hit on by a woman, and she gave me her number, and I never reached out to her because I was with my ex-partner at the time. So I didn't, but somehow the number was stashed. I found it like a few months ago, and I was like, I'm going to text it and just see, is somebody there? And ended up having a really nice conversation with Natalia. She's actually Australian, and and she was telling me like what she was doing in Paris, and then now how she's doing with COVID and the pandemic. So it was kind of nice to have this like full circle movement all the way around to meeting somebody several years later.
So that was going to be the follow-up question there, whether you got to use any French in that situation or not. And it doesn't sound like it because it was another English speaker. Boring.
Yeah. And, I didn't know where she was from. I thought she was from the UK because I was in Paris. So I thought she was, no, but she was Australian. So very fun. Good connection.
That's good. So while you were in grad school, you mentioned that you went to grad school in Seattle at University of Washington. You got to do some research on the Charleston earthquake of 1883, which I always like to bring up. Anytime we have an opportunity on Director's Cut, we talk about the 1883 Charleston earthquake because I feel like it's very underrated as an earthquake, and the risk of something seismically happening in Charleston again is a lot more significant than people realize. So what was your cool project on the Charleston earthquake? What did you take away from it?
Yeah, I got to work closely with Brett Maurer, who I'm very appreciative of. He was a great mentor in grad school. And we were getting into the liquefaction. We were looking at all of the historical data, pictures, locations, any information that we could come up with for the sand boils that occurred, where they happened, to just try to get an idea of what the scenario was for that earthquake, to update models that they could use now. So it was my first experience with anything related to paleoliquefaction for sure, and also getting experience in ArcGIS and other programs to help with that aggregation of data.
Had you ever looked at the geology of that part of the country before you worked on that project? So what did you think? I mean, what was the most surprising to you?
I had never looked at anything. I mean, I didn't even know that was a seismic, a seismically, I guess, active area. I never knew that there was an earthquake. I think for me, I was impressed with the historical aspects of it, because they have all these pictures of these amazing brick buildings, and a lot of the bricks had fallen in different locations throughout the city, and the types of damages that had occurred, because most of the documentation was around the damages of the property. So a lot of that, but also placing these sand boil locations on a map and just seeing the amount of area affected geographically in Charleston. It was a really good experience to just kind of dabble with some research before I got back to the working world.
That is great. So I'm assuming you got to travel to Charleston for that at least one time. We have to ask you a question about some travels next. See what a great segue that is. That's what doing Director's Cut every week does. You become a pro. And we make you think back a lot on Director's Cut. We're big on nostalgia here. Where was the first place you traveled to on your own?
I think my first solo travel was when I was little. I think I was probably five or six, and I traveled from Texas, and I remember flying Southwest, and this was like back in the day. So I think my dad took me to the airport and then dropped me off, and then when I got to Arizona, my mom picked me up, but it was like very much gate to gate. So it was, pre 9/11 and all of that. But I remember getting my wings, and I remember flirting with flight attendants and being like very interested in the flight attendants. And obviously they were interested in me because I was an unaccompanied minor. So that was my first solo trip. It was a flight to Phoenix.
That's great. Now, follow-up question to that. What about as an adult, as a more sentient being? Where was the first place you went on your own? Have you ever gone on vacation by yourself before? Yeah,
I have. I guess when I was 16, I traveled. And right when I got my license, I drove to Oklahoma City. I'm from a small town in western Oklahoma. So I drove to Oklahoma City. I had a blowout 30 minutes the first time I left, 30 minutes outside my hometown on I-40. And, thankfully I'm from a part of the country where, people. So I had some friends that were just happened to be driving by, and they stopped and helped me change my tire because I'm not even sure I knew how to change a tire at that point. So so I made it to Oklahoma City and got a new tire once I got there, but it was actually a little bit terrifying.
That's okay. I think you have to have those experiences. And I think when I look back on stuff like that, I feel like it's a lot more terrifying now to think about it than it was then. I mean, because the first time that happened to me was before anybody had cell phones, and you just kind of hoped for the best. Like maybe somebody would stop and help you, or maybe they wouldn't. You'd have to figure it out on your own, and you'd be there for hours. That's
right.
So you mentioned you're from Oklahoma, but now you're in Seattle. Vast cultural differences between Oklahoma and Seattle, I'm sure. Culinary wise, what food had you never tried before moving to Seattle? And I guess the follow up is, do you like it? And is it something you eat regularly now?
Yeah, I hadn't tried a whole lot of food, honestly. In Oklahoma, I had kind of dabbled with some Asian. When I went to the university in Norman, I dabbled with some Asian food, but mostly it was like burgers and chicken. So when I got to Seattle, I started meeting a bunch of different friends and much more diverse backgrounds and a lot of options. So when we were going out to eat, they were introducing me to new types of food, having Indian food and Trinidadian food. But I would say one that I like the most maybe would be poke. So it's just kind of way out there, raw fish, and I didn't really grow up eating much fish anyway. So whenever I get an opportunity, I get to eat poke, I go and take it. And I actually got to have some a while back because I had to take an Amazon package back to Sodo, which is a neighborhood south of downtown, and they had a poke place right across the street. So
and you're back. That's that's good. It's always good when you can work it into your routine too. I feel like I never want to be that person who goes way out of the way to go somewhere, but sometimes it's that good that you have to. Is there anything? So I guess this isn't really a natural follow-up then. So what's your comfort food then? Maybe something that you grew up with that you still seek out today?
Yeah, I got comfort food. I like chicken fried steak. Chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, fried okra. I love sweet potato pie. I have a really good friend who makes the best sweet potato pie. Also an Okie. But yeah, the classics. I just found out that they have a place in Seattle that has fried okra. And when I first moved here, I was shocked that nobody knew what fried okra was.
Yeah, no, that's
like every Sunday, you know?
That's definitely a regional thing. I mean, I think it's funny for me. I live in Virginia, and we don't think of Oklahoma as the South. Like, it's like just, I don't know what we think of it as. It's just over there, right? And so when somebody says that you eat that kind of stuff there, I think, at least to me, I'm always like, really? Like that's a Southern thing. Like,
yeah, we kind of bridge the gap between the Midwest and the South. So depending on the conversation, I can kind of like come in and out of, am I in the South or am I in the Midwest? And because a lot of the things we say are very Midwest-like, but then, you have fried okra. Both my grandparents were cotton farmers, so they picked cotton. Yeah, so very Southern, but also got this Midwest kind of language and attitudes and culture also.
That should be on the license plates. Oklahoma, bridging the gap.
Yeah.
So the other question that we ask everybody when they come on Director's Cut, and this is great because you have what I will call a non-traditional response to this one. How did you get started in ASCE and GI? I am happy that it has nothing to do with pizza.
Yeah, no, it didn't have anything to do with pizza. I was in petroleum engineering, and I had an internship, met a guy who introduced me to another guy who was also a petroleum engineer but got into structural, moved to Seattle. And so they needed a field engineer out here in Seattle. I took the opportunity and interviewed. I got that job and moved up here. And both my roommates at the time were construction engineers. So they were involved somewhat with ASCE. One of them was very involved with ASCE and the Geo-Institute, and then the other one not so much. But they encouraged me to get involved, and I started getting emails from YMF. And I went to a meeting. I went to like a happy hour, and got involved with the filming of a promotional video for RIMAC. And through that, became friends with a woman named Inez Malley, who was a structural engineer. And she introduced me to her TA in grad school, who's Dana Biggerstaff, who now works in the city of Seattle. But his dad had a geotechnical engineering firm in the Seattle area. And so I interviewed with that job, ended up getting it, and then remained active with ASCE, and then became even more involved with the Geo-Institute the next 7 years after that. So yeah, kind of non-traditional networking all the way.
Culminating with being the chapter chair now, which we'll talk about a little bit at the end of this. So another thing about you that I learned in the preparation for this interview, and then in talking before the interview, I learned even more. You're a music guy, like hardcore. You have 5 guitars, you said, which we can even talk about that in a minute, I guess. But the first thing I found out is that you're a singer, and I think you're probably pretty good at it. I'll have to reword this question. We're going to ask 2, because I learned that you read it a different way than I wrote it. So for you personally, what has been your favorite singing or vocal performance that you've done? What's your favorite performance that you got to do?
Yeah, so I went to a music school. I graduated in the recession with my petroleum engineering degree, so I couldn't find work. So I took that year that I couldn't find work, and I went to a contemporary music school. And we were performing and doing things, and a lot of great performances, but they were more intense, I would say, because you're surrounded by other musicians, and some of them are very small performances, and everybody there knows when you mess up because they're all musicians. So those were kind of intense. But as I developed, when I moved out to Seattle, my first paid gig here, a bunch of my friends came. It was at Pono Ranch in Ballard, a really nice venue. I got there, they had all the sound equipment I needed. I just had to kind of like set it up and figure out their system. And my friends showed up. Well, a bunch of my friends were there, but then a group of friends came maybe like 10 minutes into the set, and they were already pretty turned. And they were like at the front. You know, people are trying to like, you know, drink, they're on dates, they're talking with friends. And then a couple of my friends come up and they're like front row, like screaming. And I was like highly embarrassed. And, you know, I'm like looking at the manager of the restaurant, like, oh my gosh, is he going to ask me back? Or like, I mean, at least they were, you know, buying drinks. So they were supporting the business. So hopefully, but yeah, that was probably my funnest, just because my friends were there. I got to play, I think, 3 hours. It was a long set, and it was a really good night.
So I have a follow-up question here, but I think the first thing I have to say is we're in like episode 68 or something of Director's Cut. Definitely the first time the word turnt has appeared in an episode. So thank you for bringing that in. And we'll have to put a little definition down under the thing for those of you who are over, I don't know, about 40. So the follow-up question is, you know, engineering and music, I feel like, are very different in this way, where if you were to mess up on a project, there's a good chance something's going to go wrong. And people are going to know about it. If you mess up when you're performing on stage, nobody really ever notices, because
a happy accident on stage.
So how do you make that mental adjustment, and how did you make that mental adjustment when you started performing to realize that even if I make a mistake, most people are not ever going to know?
Oh, that took just a lot of performing, a lot of practice and performing and just realizing eventually, like, wow, they just don't hear the same that I hear. So when I know I mess up, they probably don't know. And also being like having terrible performances. Well, I thought they were terrible. And then afterwards, my friends, oh my gosh, this was great. And I'm like, okay, like they don't hear it the same. So, you know, whereas in engineering, it's like, no, you need to dot your I's, cross your T's. So it's very much staying present in the moment to make sure you're covering every single base as it comes along. You just kind of bridge this gap. Like the creative side, you have to be more flowy, and the engineering side, you got to be more step oriented and follow the process and make sure you're coming through the process the way it should be done.
And it's really impressive that you're able to do both. I don't think a lot of people would be able to do that. So I think you mentioned earlier on, if you didn't, we're going to tell everybody now, your undergrad degree was in petroleum engineering at OU. And I'm sure there was some overlap with what you would get in a civil or a geotech program specifically. But there's got to be some different things in there, right? What did you learn in petroleum engineering that you might have missed if you had gone through a traditional civil program as an undergrad?
There's quite a bit. I think it's helped me a lot in my career, especially from the science side of things. There's the geology, just understanding how geology works and what it's doing. And so whenever I came across that in civil, I started realizing, wow, there's a lot going on in both of the fields that are the same. And that was very, very helpful. So when I was talking to geologists, I understood what they were talking about, and I could work with them to understand that. The other thing that I think was most important was the business aspect. In petroleum, everything was tied to the dollar, so to making projects work and to actually getting to the bottom line. Whereas in the civil program, it's focused only on at least my grad degree was focused only on the science. So you get a lot of theoretical things, but you weren't getting the practical industry application of those things.
Wow, that's good. Very concise answer. I really like that. And now we're going to talk a little bit about your time in petroleum engineering.
Yeah.
We teased this at the beginning of the show here. What's the longest day you've ever had in your life? Tell us all about it.
Yeah, it was definitely a petroleum day. I was working for Halliburton as a measurement engineer in the field, and we had a lot of issues with our tool. They were failing because we had these O-rings, and they were sourcing O-rings from all over the world, but some of them weren't good. And so mud was getting through them and destroying the tools. And so we were having tool failure. And every time you have a tool failure, it was like several hours of building the tool, getting the tool ready, taking the old tool out of the hole, putting the new tool in, resetting the systems, getting all of the communication with the tool going. So learning all of that and doing all of that. One time we had the tool failure. The day shift guy had been up all day. We were probably 48 hours in. So we had been working 48 hours. I was on 12-hour towers. So it was typically him 12 and then me 12 and then him 12. But we were having to stay up through all of it. So it was basically, and they wanted both of the hands on the rig floor, installing the tool and working through the troubleshooting to make sure that they were getting their value. So I think that was probably the most intense work situation I've ever been in, just because the guy who was training me and who was the day lead, he was probably retirement age, and was chain smoking and drinking a lot of cheap coffee, and his body was physically shaking. I was nervous that I thought he was going to have a stroke, because we were literally up for 48 hours with just maybe 5-10 minute naps here and there, nothing major. You kind of start getting a little woozy and delirious, and everything kind of becomes funny. And it was a little bit jarring, because you also recognize it's very dangerous on the rig floor. A lot of people lose their lives on the rig floor, so you need to be safety conscious. But on the other hand is, I need to get this job done. I need to do a good job. And at the time especially, I felt like I need to prove myself. I'm the young guy, and I want them to see that I can do this work. And so, yeah, the pressure was there, but it was it's one of those experiences you look back on now and you think, wow, I'm super glad I had to go through that, because it taught me how nice I have it now. So I can have gratitude for a normal work week now, because I've experienced when it's this is not normal and this is not necessarily healthy. So
going through that too, and that's obviously an extreme example, but there are a lot of long days when you're out in the field like that, and when you're in that line of work period. Did you develop any bad habits during that time, and how have you overcome those since?
Yeah, definitely there, I was working with roughnecks, literally roughnecks in the field in Oklahoma. So I would say my language was probably very, very unpolished, very rough, and and sometimes vulgar. So whenever I moved to Seattle, I was still working with drillers, so I had like a transition period before I got to like consultants. And even still, it's like I still have to really work on that because on some sides of it you have the candor and the authenticity and transparency, which are all really, really great and it respected attributes for a professional. But on the other hand, the vulgar talk, sometimes now that I live in Seattle, I've become more educated on misogyny and things like this. So there's language that's used in those situations that, not only is not appropriate, but is also abusive. So I think the transition through my career has been one where it's kind of a polishing, but also keeping the attributes that makes it valuable and brings value to me as a professional.
That's great. Good answer. And I'm glad you survived that long day and became more well rested. So when we talked about your involvement in ASCE and GI, we mentioned that you've been chapter chair of our Seattle chapter within GI for the past couple of years. This is one of our largest chapters. It's one of our oldest chapters, I think, too. What was the good and bad about being chapter chair during the pandemic for the last 2 years? It had to have been pretty weird and definitely not what you expected it was going to be like.
Oh yeah, it was weird. I was when the pandemic started, I was in the role of vice president. That role is actually a organizing role for our spring seminar, which is our big event. I had made it all the way through the planning. I was like 2 speakers left, like last steps, and I was stoked because it was going to be all new venue. We had an exciting topic. It was going to be super successful. And then, middle of March, boom, everything shuts down. And okay, well, it'll just be a couple of weeks, right? So we'll wait and see. And then, as we realized, no, this is not going to be a couple weeks. We thought about a virtual meeting. We thought it wasn't happening. So we just started hitting roadblocks. Everything kind of accelerated. It felt like time just was really hard to get a grip on it. Like it wasn't the normal pace of things. So that flew by. I became president. We were organizing virtually and everything was going good. We were getting meetings going and it was all great. We just kind of were trying to fill in the gaps to provide value for our members and to keep the community connected and involved. And so typically, we serve 1-year terms and you've just been on the board in several positions and I met with like past presidents and brought all the past presidents together to discuss because this is an extraordinary issue. It's kind of, I needed help. And I just humbly went to the past presidents and was like, I need help. I don't know what to do. We had kind of, it seemed like a shortcoming, which was none of the members of the board had actually been to an in-person meeting. So I volunteered to kind of remain in the position while transferring the responsibilities to the actual board members for each of their responsibilities. And it's worked really good. This year, that's what we've done. I mean, I'm still like getting the emails and kind of organizing, but it's mostly just making sure they have the information they need to do their job. And it was a great opportunity for me because it allowed me to focus on other things with the group that we had kind of shelved for several years in a row. We finally got our new website launched. We finally started talking about things like diversity and inclusivity in the group. We've always been a great chapter for diversity and inclusivity, but it just never really been a conversation. We just didn't really bring it up. So we were able to talk about that. I was also able to have connections with a lot of past presidents and supporters of the group, a lot of like heads of the geotechnical firms who have been very supportive in keeping the organization running. Stan Boyle, Bob Metcalf, all geoengineers, Shannon Wilson, and the city of Seattle also, just to bring in more value to help plan for the future. And I think, the challenges are, universal. Everybody had pretty much the same challenges, keeping meetings going, keeping attendance up after, webinar after webinar after webinar, keeping people interested in our group, and also keeping the community alive with some sort of discussion. But really, I've been fortunate because we had such a strong group that had been built over the last 45 years that whenever I got there, it was really just kind of like, okay, let's take a couple steps to just kind of move it more into the direction that we're at now in 2021, 2022. So that included the inclusivity and diversity. And, we finished our payment to the University of Washington for our obligation of $500,000, and that was done. And so now it was like, okay, well, let's move the money that our members are bringing to help there be more visibility for scholarships for diversity, and trying to make sure that people know that there's a place for them, whether they're male, female, whether they have whatever religion they have, whatever their sexual orientation, whatever their religious background, that's not what we're looking at first, but that it's acknowledged, and hopefully that there's some visibility that comes out of that in the leadership.
So a great couple of years, it sounds like, super productive. Yeah. And it's amazing that everybody has moved this way. I think the word of 2020 was pivot, that everybody used all the time. And it sounds like you guys did a great job of that. We're very excited to be getting back and doing things in person. And I think we're going to announce soon that the chapter summit will be back, and we'll be doing that at the end of July. So all of our chapters can show up at that and exchange best practices. For all of our viewers, if you're not involved with your local group, it's a great time to get involved. It's always a good time to get involved. If you are saying to yourself, I don't know if I have a local group, just go over to geoinstitute.org. Go to our chapters page and you can find the group nearest you. We now have 60 chapters that our Puerto Rico chapter started up earlier this month, and 60 great groups for you to find people and get involved with. So Dustin, you made it. You made it through all 10 questions. I make a big deal out of it every week, but everybody makes it through. But it's still an achievement, something to be proud of. And all our viewers, again, if you liked what you saw here, definitely subscribe, get notifications, and like I said, we'll let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel, which is super frequently. So Dustin, thanks a lot for doing this today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
I think it was great. And, Director's Cut is every Wednesday. I guess that's the last thing I could say about it, to promote it for everybody. I don't do enough self-promotion. But we'll have a brand new episode of Director's Cut next week.